Welcome, folks. Thanks for joining us today for this Mass Fresh Grant information session. My name is Abby Getman-Skillicorn. I work with Massachusetts Farm to School, and I'm joined by my colleague Maggie Nowak at the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. We'll jump in. So for today's information session, we plan to go over introductions, talk a little bit about what Farm to School is, review the Mass Fresh funding opportunity and eligibility. Maggie will do a deep dive into the application review, including into the GEM system, and we will offer some resources and answers, have materials around frequently asked questions. Again, my name is Abby Getman-Skillicorn from Massachusetts Farm to School. Maggie, do you want to take yourself off mute and introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Hello, folks. My name is Maggie Nowak. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the local food system specialist for DESE's Office for Food and Nutrition. And that's the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education for those who aren't aware. Welcome.
So for those of you who are new to Massachusetts Farm to School, we are a 20-plus-year-old organization that works throughout Massachusetts to strengthen local farms and fisheries and promote healthy communities by increasing access to local food purchasing and education in schools. So we work on a variety of activities, including professional learning opportunities, networking, policy and advocacy work, and communications. The materials on the right-hand side is our program called Harvest of the Month, which is available for educators and school nutrition professionals to really promote the local bounty in Massachusetts year-round. When we talk about farm to school, we also talk a lot about the 3 C's of farm to school programming, which include involving classroom activities, cafeteria and local procurement, as well as community, getting involved with your local farms, but also having local practitioners or community members involved in the school environment around the school gardens, etc. For the opportunity for Massachusetts Fresh, it's a statewide farm to school and farm to early education grant program administered by DESE, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education's Office of Food and Nutrition Programs. And we anticipate approximately $300,000 will be available for awards of up to $30,000 per applicant in this next round of fiscal year 26 Mass Fresh funding. The Mass Fresh funding awards are dependent upon state appropriation, so we are still going through the budgetary process with our state legislators to secure Mass Fresh funding for next fiscal year. The project activities for this application round must be completed by June 30th, 2026, and the grant funding cannot be used to continue existing activities. So all applicants must demonstrate that the funds will be utilized to initiate new activities in your learning environments. The eligibility for the Mass Fresh program is that the applicants must be sponsors of either the National School Lunch Program or the Child and Adult Care Feeding Program, which if you are a CACFP sponsor, you must also be a licensed early education program. So the application is really focused on those two audiences. And the entities can include schools and pre-K programs that schools and districts serving pre-K programs up to 12th grade, as well as licensed early education programs.
And Abby, if I can throw in there too, for our early education applicants, we are also looking for applicants who are specifically serving children from birth to about 5 years old, but that early education, young child age range. Thanks.
Thank you, Maggie. Yes, this is the grant as it is right now is not designed for after school programming, etc. This is a nice map that's that's showing you past Mass Fresh grantees. If you are looking at the actual slide deck, there's the link on the top, brings you to descriptions of what past Mass Fresh grantees have done. And we're really working to make sure that this grant is available and accessible to programs statewide. So from Berkshire County to the tip of the Cape and hopefully the island soon. The grant award tracks from the Mass Rush grant has a few different tracks that are available, again, for funding between $3,000 and $30,000 for the fiscal year 2026. And so the categories for this are new programs that are initiated for K-12 education programs, new farm to early education grant initiatives. And those are really for programs that have not, maybe they have a school garden, but it's not really integrated in other elements of the learning environment. Um, Maybe you are doing some local procurement, but the students really don't know what they're getting that's local on the menu, that kind of thing. And then we also have tracks for expanding farm to school education, and that's for early education centers and K-12 programs that are already doing some integrated farm to school activities, but are really looking to take their program to the next level. So this would include, programs that are already doing farm field trips and local procurement, or integrated school gardens where the garden harvest is getting into the school cafeteria and students know about it. The application questions and process is the same for both the early education programs and for the K-12 programs as well. But we have those four different tracks. And if you have questions about where you line up or where your program lines up, we'll have resources, and I'm available for conversations or consultations as you go through your grant application process. So as I was saying, like applicants should apply in the new category if you really do one or none of, classroom school garden programming. Maybe you do some local sourcing, or yeah, maybe you have some farm field trips, but really only one of those categories. And if you've been dormant in all of those activities, maybe you used to have a really thriving school garden program, or you used to celebrate Harvest in the Month, but you haven't done that for at least 3 years, you can apply as a new program. We understand that with challenges around COVID, et cetera, there's been turnover and different initiatives really need to be kickstarted again to feel real in the learning environments.
And
So
Abby, if I can add just a quick context here on the distinction between new and expanding for the grant. So something I've heard folks that's helpful for folks to hear is that the distinction is really about your institution, not about the project itself that you're applying for. So if you are an institution that has local procurement, that's doing Harvest of the Month in the classroom, that does farm field trips, but you would like to initiate, a brand new hydroponics project that's never been done before, your application would still be expanding because overall you're expanding your more robust farm to school program that already exists. Even though the project itself is brand new, you don't have any links to what's currently happening in your school. The new category is really reserved for those entire institutions and applicants that we kind of have joining the farm to school movement that are really new to this work and maybe don't have any coordination or are only doing one or two of those facets. So hopefully that context helps some folks.
thanks, Maggie. So for project activities, grants are really designed to, again, start up or expand farm to school activities. So it could include, like Maggie was saying, building a new school garden or indoor, hydroponics program in your learning environment, developing classroom curriculum or lesson plans that support food literacy efforts. If you're planning to expand in-school childcare programming to promote food literacy, which, are getting kids gardening, cooking, taste tests, etc. Those are eligible activities. Farm field trips are eligible activities. If you wanted to include professional development for training and educators that bring food literacy initiatives to their classrooms, or for professional development and training for school nutrition professionals so that they integrate more local or minimally processed ingredients into the meal program, those are all eligible. So, it can help fund um, you know, your facilities as far as like if you needed to get a school garden or repair school garden kind of thing. It could include professional development for the staff, stipends for them to attend trainings, as well as farm field trips, etc. So we are now on to GEMS. Maggie, do you want to take it from here?
Absolutely. Thanks, Abby. Great. So for folks who have not applied for a DESE grant before, or it's been a while, GEMS is DESE's cloud-based online grant management platform and fiscal platform. If it's been a while for you, it has, for your edification, replaced EdGrants, which was our former grant management system. But we've been working with GEMS for a moment now, and so I think that most folks will be somewhat familiar with the platform. So I'll kind of gloss over these attributes fairly quickly. But for folks who maybe have never applied for a grant before, GEMS requires that each individual has a personal login and an assigned role to any specific grant. And there you will see when you log into the platform, your institution might be eligible to apply for tens or hundreds of grants that DESE makes available each year. But for you to specifically start and fill out an application, you have to have your own individual login and you have to have an assigned role to your grant. Most folks at this point have access to GEMS, but if you are a CACFP sponsor and you've never worked with DESE before and have not applied for a grant, you may need to gain access to the system. So we'll talk about that in a few minutes. If you have no one in your institution who has a login or access to the platform, applicants will need to figure out who in your district or in your institution or entity has a role called the User Access Administrator within GEMS. That's basically the person who has the power to grant other folks roles and access to the platform. So every institution that is within GEMS, that has GEMS access, has someone with this role. And they are really going to be the person you need to ask permission to access this grant. So it's not something you're going to be reaching out to me or to DESE about in terms of an individual login. If your district already has access or if your sponsor already has access, you're going to find that user access administrator. And then the role that if you are the grant writer, you're the one with the vision and the proposal for this project, the role you're going to need in GEMS is called LEA grant writer. And that is what that user access administrator is going to help you gain access to. Next slide, please. Great. And so, as I mentioned, there might be two routes to your experience. And the first is that if you're new, and this is for folks who do not have any access, don't seem to have access to GEMS at all, or can't find the specific grant. And this is probably mostly going to apply to sponsors who are CACFP sponsors in early education. So if you are new to GEMS, you've never accessed the platform before, and no one in your district or your institution has access, you're going to complete this GEMS temporary access form and submit it back to me at DESE. And so we will go ahead and process you temporary access to the platform so that you can apply for the grant. And if your organization is funded, then you will be granted full access and have a long-term login for your institution. So that is a step that takes 5 to 7 business days. So it's really important that you submit that documentation as soon as possible if you're interested in applying for a grant. And then for folks who do have an access administrator, you are able to have someone in your institution log into the platform, but in the search function, you cannot find this grant, which will be fund code 0710. You'll see for all DESE grants, there is a number code associated. You're going to go ahead and email me to just request grant access. There are a number of organizations, because we have to do access manually, that may be eligible to apply for the grant, but we haven't been able to identify you, originally through our audit to add you to the grant in the first flush. So it's certainly not a problem. It doesn't hold back or have any impact on your grant application. But if you think that you are eligible based on the eligibility requirements that we described, just go ahead and send me an email and I'll go ahead and vet that you're in good standing and are a CACFP sponsor, and then we can get you access to the grant in the system. Next slide, please. Great. So, yep, I just again want to emphasize for those new users that you do need to allow for at least 5 business days to grant yourself temporary access to GEMS. And that is for folks who your whole institution is new to GEMS. If you're working in a district and you've never been involved with a grant before, it is still very likely someone in your district has access, and you do not need to request access. You just need to find your user access administrator in your institution, and you won't have this 5-day delay. In regards to our grant, this year the grant is going to be due June 27th. And so all temporary access request forms for folks new to GEMS need to be submitted by June 20th to make sure you have enough time to actually access the system and submit your grant. And unfortunately, the failure to provide that access request within 5 days could result in being unable to submit a grant by the due date, and your proposal would not be considered. All right, next slide. Great. So for folks new to the platform, I do have a full walkthrough video available, but I'll show some quick screenshots. So you'll see the Just Desi GEMS homepage here. There's a login button in the upper right-hand corner. And once you log in using your specific credentials, so again, you should have specific credentials for yourself, not a standard, institutional credential. You're going to go on the left-hand menu bar and you're going to go to Search Funding Applications. And the last thing you'll see is this search function on the right, and it's going to ask you, to basically put in some criteria to identify the grant. And you're going to put in the fiscal year as well as fund code 0710, and you'll see the full name of our grant, which is Massachusetts Farming Reinforces Education and Student Health, and MassFresh is that acronym. So you can leave all the other components of the search function blank. Just really make sure that that fiscal year is accurate for the upcoming fiscal year. And when you select search, you'll be able to find the grant opportunity. Next slide. Great. So we're going to dive into a few components of the application in GEMS. We're not going to review all of the aspects, though you'll see them listed here in this, component in this application summary. We'll also describe at the end of this webinar that we have made a planning template available that documents all of the questions that are asked in the application process, and that is available to folks without needing to have a GEMS login. It's just available on the GEMS homepage. And so you'll also be able to go through the questions here. But as you'll see on the summary page, everything that's highlighted, we're going to discuss really briefly today. And you'll see this in the application as well, but applications are scored out of 100 points. And each of the categories scoring values is denoted next to the section title. So you can kind of get a sense of what areas of your application might weigh more heavily than others in the review process. Next slide. Great. So, and then this is high level, just an example of what the fields and the feel literally of GEMS looks like. So, there's a couple different types. There's a couple different ways you might fill out questions. Some might be short answer, like you see at the top where you're giving contact information. Some, like the question at the bottom of this slide, is just a yes or no. It's a radio, selection button. And then there'll be open blocks where you can put text. So anytime that you are working in GEMS, the way to save is to go to to the top of GEMS. You'll see an option to save and go next or go to a new section. And that will save your page, but definitely make sure to do that at every juncture you can and before you log out. Otherwise, your content will not save in the system. Next slide, please. Great. So in terms of the application, the first place that you will start to see some in-depth questions is in regards to your child nutrition program. So this grant is coming out specifically of the Office for Food and Nutrition. And so while we know we have a lot of different stakeholders completing MassFresh applications, and we really welcome that partnership, the project does need to be centered or have, have association or coordination at some level with your school nutrition program, at least minimally for filling out the application. So we are going to be asking for some data around your child nutrition program, which your food service director or your CACFP operator is going to have. And so you're really going to need to ensure that you do coordinate with them to minimally answer those questions, if not design your whole project. So we'll ask for the sponsor, agreement number. We'll ask some data around what schools are going to be involved with this project, if it's not the entire district or center. And if so, we're going to, regardless of who's involved, for those folks that are involved, those specific sites, we're going to ask for some meal data and service data on your child nutrition program. We're also going to be asking of whether you've received Mass Fresh funding before. And for folks who have received Mass Fresh funding before, you are eligible, certainly eligible to apply. But the RFP does stipulate that there is a competitive advantage for folks who are new to Mass Fresh and have not been funded in the past 2 years. Last but not least, if you have a current farm to school program activities happening within your cafeteria or during meal service, we're going to just ask you some questions about what that looks like. Next slide. Great. And then we're going to dive into learning a little bit more about your program and your project. So we are going to ask you to provide a brief description of high level what your project is, introducing your project, and then to go into how you are designing what these activities look like. If you are going to identify as an expanding applicant, we'd also love for you to give us some background of what your program looks like prior to getting Mass Fresh funding if you're funded, and then how this funding will allow you to build or do something new and expanded. So it is really important for those folks who are identified as expanding to be really clear about how the activities you're applying for are new and expanding what you're currently doing in this work. And then, as I mentioned before, because this grant is coming out of the Office for Food and Nutrition, we do really have a scoring emphasis on programs that integrate the work that they're doing in the classroom or classroom and community or school garden with their child nutrition program, breakfast, lunch, snack, supper, etc., depending on what your program manages. Next slide. Great. And so the area of the application that scored the greatest is this project work plan. It's your opportunity to really dive deep and give us a sense of what you're going to be leveraging these funds to do. And so we're going to ask every applicant to provide us 3 goals that their Mass Fresh project aspires to accomplish. And then within those goals, you're going to describe at least 2 activities that you're going to use this funding to complete that meet those goals. And so, those goals should be concise. They, can take on that the adage or the acronym, the SMART goal of thinking about things that are specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time bound. And the activities are going to be filled out in a table that asks you to describe, who the activity is affecting, so your target audience, how you'll measure impact. So maybe that's through, people attending, the number of resources created, the number of pounds of food you grow. You'll have a few options in the drop down of the table to select. You're going to give us a projection of how many folks you think that this activity specifically will impact in whatever way the indicator describes. And then you're going to give us the timeline and responsible party for meeting that goal. In terms of thinking about activities, I do want to just articulate here that we have so many different types of institutions applying for this grant. And when we talk about impacts, it can feel for maybe a small charter school or a small early education center, man, like maybe my target numbers are not going to look like 4,000, right? Maybe I only serve 20 to 40 to 50 students in my institution, and that's okay. We're really looking for projects that can do either a lot of breadth across a wide diversity of students, or for smaller institutions, really have that depth with the students that you're going to be working with because you're giving them a lot of touch points in farm to school. So make sure to find those impacts that are really describing your work and don't shy away from, the fact that, smaller institutions that impact might look differently, and that's okay. That's taken into account in the review process. Next slide. Great. So as I said again, applicants should outline 3 goals. And so each school requires that you include at least one associated activity, but strong applicants will have two or more activities described under each goal that are associated with accomplishing that goal for your Mass Fresh project. Next slide. Great. And so after that, we do request that every applicant provides a champion or letter of support from a community partner. And that can look a number of different ways. So you might have a letter of support from a community partner who is working with you on your project, and you're actually going to contract with money from MassFresh to pay to do some work for you to make your project possible. If your project is really based in the strengths of your institution already, then we're really looking for a letter of support that just really speaks to your commitment and experience conducting this work. And so the letters of support should address the applicant's ability to successfully complete the project you've proposed, what that supporter sees as the potential benefits of your project. And then if it is the case that that individual is supporting your project or that organization is supporting your project, they should be stating how they're going to be supporting the work plan. And so again, we require at least one letter of support, even if you're not working with a community partner. And that could come from a really diverse array of folks. And I think I have a list on the next slide for some examples. Sorry, Abby, one second. We'll go back really quickly to this slide. Thanks so much. And so you can provide up to two letters of support. Up to two letters of support will be scored and averaged if you provide two. And the ability of the application to address the three bullet points here will be how your letter is scored. So just some edification there. Next slide. Now we're ready, Abby. Thanks. And then one caveat about the having two letters of support. So if you are designing a project where you're working with more than two contracted community partners, so you're going to pay, three, four, five different, contracted community partners or individuals to conduct a body of work where you're going to have a scope of work, etc. We do want to have a letter of support from all of those entities. So GEMS is going to limit you to only allowing you to upload two letters of support. But if you have more than that in terms of contracted partners, you do need to email me those additional letters, and you'll see my email here and in the RFP. And again, for contracted partners, that's really folks that you're going to have a contracted long-term relationship with. So if you're going to make a purchase at a local food hub, or if you're going to work with a garden supply company to get some, goods or, have them maybe install a fence, this wouldn't necessarily be considered a contracted partnership. We're looking for those partnerships that are going to basically have a scope of work over a set period of time. Maybe they're a community partner that's going to do taste tests with you for the next 6 months, or who is going to come and help do after school programming and do, a number of different components in their scope of work and partnership with you. Those are the letter of support. Those are the contracted partners and letters of support we're going to need from you. And for folks who may not have those relationships in your project, that's perfectly fine. Other places you might get a letter of support is if you're a bigger district and you're working with maybe your science department or your culinary arts program, you could get a letter of support from that entity. If that is not part of, if they're not part of your, application team that's like specifically writing this grant, you might also get a letter of support from a local farmer who you've done business with and can show your commitment to purchasing local or doing farm to school work, maybe from a parent volunteer, a legislator, and this list is not exhaustive. So as long as that letter can really speak to the criteria on the last slide around your project's impacts and your ability to successfully complete your proposal, it would be considered and scored. All right, next slide.
You just have one other element, and that is because Mass Farm to School is supporting all Mass Fresh applicants. We are not in a position to provide letters of support for this particular grant, though we are happy to provide letters of support for other opportunities that, can be federal grants or private foundation grants for your scopes of work, but we are not in a position to lend favor towards any one particular applicant for this grant opportunity.
Thanks, Abby. Perfect. Great. So last but not least, you're going to be filling out a budget. So there's two places where we're going to ask for budget information. Within the actual application questions, you're going to see a budget narrative table. And the purpose of that table is really to connect the activities in your work plan to what you're actually asking for money for within your budget. And so you're going to see that the table asks you to articulate what the thing is that you're purchasing or procuring, what it's going to cost, and then to help us relate that specifically to the place in your work plan that you're, doing that work or activity. This, what you see on the screen, is the budget. So what I just described previously is the budget narrative. And then the budget itself is a separate section in GEMS that you'll see labeled budget. And this is where your budget is officially going to be logged and articulated kind of in the GEMS system. And it's the mechanism we use to officially award funds to folks who are awarded. So this is all parts of the application should be fully completed, but please know that you need to fill out both application components, the narrative for your budget and the budget itself, and that this budget piece is very, very important. So in terms of making updates to your budget, so it will start out as 0 when you go into the system. You'll see an initial table where you go into your budget of, I believe, 9 different categories of spending. And to make a change in your budget, you're going to see on the left-hand side of that table and also on this slide, it's highlighted this modify button. And so you'll press into that for the category you'd like to, put your associated request in for. So let's say I was going to put in a professional salary for a new part-time farm to school coordinator. I would press modify. And then on the next slide, you're going to select in the small left-hand corner. I wish it was more prominent because it's easy to miss. But you're going to see this add budget detail hyperlink, and you're going to press into that. And if you go to the next slide, Abby, it is going to take you into that basically it's creating your line item of your budget. So this is where you're going to describe the cost of that item. If it's a supply and you're going to have multiple of those items, you can change the quantity. And the narrative description, that's really going to be describing how you've gotten to that cost or what specifically that cost is. So there's maybe some overlap in the budget narrative and this narrative within the budget, but do make sure that both are filled out. And having a narrative description in this budget is required. So a couple of other things to know about your budget. So you'll be prompted to include an object code, which is that first top line item in budget details. Thank you, Abby, as well as a function code. You'll be asked for the quantity of the item or service that you're requesting, the cost, and then that narrative description. All of those areas are required. The primary function tag is optional. You can also select that if that's something your budget office uses to denote different costs. And for folks who are really new to filling out a budget or you're not quite sure where different items might be allocated, there is a chart of accounts guidance and crosswalk that GEMS provides, that DESE provides in the DESE resources homepage of GEMS. So that's a great starting place. Ultimately, the budget is going to be also used if you're awarded as the way that you draw down funds. So when you are designing your budget, if you're not, in frequent contact with your fiscal or your budget office or your business manager, you may want to run this through them and make sure that you're placing costs in the right category so that they can draw them down if you're awarded and it comes time to spend those funds. So DESE certainly does provide some guidance, and I'm happy to answer questions about budget categorization. But really, ultimately, some of those budget category nuances that are might be very specific to your institution, and DESE will defer to your business manager and fiscal team to make that decision between categories that may be somewhat similar. So And again, there is a distinction between that narrative description, which is within the GEMS budget, and then the budget narrative, which is in the list of questions that you're asked within the application. And you're going to want to fill out both of those things. All right, next slide. Great. And then this is the what the budget narrative table looks like, and that's within the required grants question. So as I mentioned, those categories that are stated, and in that section that describes the brief explanation, that section is really to help you emphasize how you've gotten to that total cost. So if let's say you have a garden supply line item and it's $400. We're really looking in that brief explanation to understand that you're buying a couple hoses and, some seeds and, really giving us a more rationale of how you've come to that cost, just to make sure that we can assess whether it's allowable and appropriate for your grant activities. All right, next slide. Perfect. So some other GEMS reminder. So one not stated here that I just want to state is when you go into the system as a grant writer and you're in the grant portal, you do have to, at the very top of your grant, change the status of your grant from application, I believe it's application started, is what you're going to change it to. And you guys basically have to press the hyperlink at the very top and confirm that you would like to start applying for your grant before you can actually type in any of the answers to questions or put in your budget. If you go to look at your grant without taking that step, then you're going to see that all of the questions are grayed out and you don't have a way to respond. So changing that status at the top is going to be your key to actually applying for the grant. And you have to be a grant writer to be able to do that. You have to have that role in GEMS. So some other quick tips and components. So in terms of unallowable costs, I'm always happy to answer question and answers on questions about that. But something that is not allowable is purchase of food that would be integrated as part of already your reimbursable meal for a child nutrition program. And similar for foods that you might be buying or components that you might be buying that would then be sold competitively as a fundraiser within your school or your early education program. In addition, for GEMS navigation, you are able to apply for indirect costs with this grant, but if you are a community partner or community organization, you do have to apply with DESE each year to have access to an approved indirect cost rate. So if that's not something that you've done yet, we are able to allocate those costs in a different category and then revise them at another time. But you do need to start the process of completing the indirect cost application. And again, this is just for those community partners who are not schools or districts, charter schools, etc. For charter schools and districts, you're going to see in the grant that you do have to actually manually add your indirect cost rate because it hasn't been fully added into the GEM system for this current fiscal year since we're a little early. But generally speaking, this is usually something that automatically calculates. There's a calculator tool within the budget for you to see how much indirect cost you would have access to. You do not need to include indirect costs in your budget by any means, and it's at your discretion to use that calculator and add that number to your final budget request. And again, the budget cannot exceed $30,000 for your project. Secondly, you're going to see two areas that prompt you to submit your letters of support. There's one within the required grant question section, and then there's a separate section entirely in GEMS called related documents. Those areas are linked, so if you upload it to one place, you should see it in the other section, and you only need to do the upload once. So you can check yourself at either link to see those documents, but as long as you've uploaded them in one place, you're going to be all set. And then last but not least, if you really want access to these questions to start planning with your team, to maybe start drafting some answers without yet having access to GEMS, there is access to a planning template that outlines the questions that are asked in GEMS, and you're going to find that on the homepage under DESE resources in the competitive grants, planning templates, and documents section. and that is already available for use. All right, next slide. Great. So once you have written your grant, which is the big step, we have a also the second big, very important step, which is submission. And formally, you may remember that a DESE used to have basically a contract form. You would be required to seek out written, wet signatures of your fiscal representative and maybe your executive director or superintendent to sign this form, and that would be part of your application submission. Now in GEMS, that is all done digitally. So you as a grant writer will change the status from started to submitted once you've finished all the components and you've written all those elements. And that's going to bump your grant to the individual in your institution that is the fiscal representative. They are going to go ahead, take a review probably of your budget or, those components that are important for review. And then they are going to submit the grant to finally your superintendent or executive director, that last role in GEMS. And that is the final step of approval. And it's really important to understand that unless you have all three folks submit that approval, until that has happened, your grant is not considered submitted. So if you've written your grant, have all the components, and you've submitted it, that does not mean that DESE can review your grant until it's been also signed off by your fiscal representative and superintendent. So I can't articulate enough. I know that there are a number of times where we have grants that get stuck at a different approval level for one reason or another, and it doesn't have the sign off from your final, level, that superintendent chief executive hasn't happened by the deadline, which in this case is Friday, June 27th. And unfortunately, DESE cannot review your grant unless it has gone through all three steps of approval. It's not considered submitted and it will not be considered. And we do not have any processes for exception in this breakdown of the workflow. So it's really important that you give yourself enough time to get all those grant approvals. If your grant is not submitted, you'll get prompts and gems that tell you that. And so just make sure to work with your team to make sure it gets through all the approvals by that deadline, which this year is June 27th, 2025. All right, next slide. Great. And so this is the landing page where you'll see the request for proposals on DESE's website. It is a great summary of what we've described in this presentation of the purposes, eligibility, components, etc. And so definitely take a read through, and it will also, help you link to GEMS if you need the grant, link for that platform. Next slide. Awesome. And then again, all of the interactions or application processes are going to take place in GEMS, except if you need to submit another letter of support from a contractor. Those are going to be emailed to me directly. And there is a question and answer process for this grant. So as a competitive grant, DESE, so myself and members of my team cannot directly pick up the phone and answer questions directly to you or directly via email, but you can submit them to me via email, and then you will see that they will be answered through the official question and answer guidance for this grant. And so that is going to be linked in the request for proposals. That slide you saw previously is going to have a link to that, and those question and answers are updated weekly, and I do my very best to ping you when your question has been answered in that process. To ensure we have enough time to address everyone's questions and get those answers back out, all questions for this grant do have to be requested, have to be asked by Friday, June 13th, prior to the grant deadline. So after June 13th, we won't be taking any more questions about the grant, and you'll have to work with the guidance and answers that have been provided. That said, Mass Farm to School is, always a resource and partner, and Abby will talk a little bit in a second about some of those additional resources they can provide for grant questions, etc. All right, I think last but not least, this is the Just DESE homepage, the GEMS homepage, just another, just screen for you to familiarize yourself with that sign in login. And then there is going to be a separate video if you'd like to watch that walks you through basically the steps of getting into your grant application to apply.
Thanks, Maggie. And uh, one other distinction is just that Mass Farm to School, we are here to help support your application and we work with awarded programs. We are not involved in the evaluation process at all. And so um, we're happy to elevate questions that Desi can then answer. But just for context, information that we are consulting with you on for your application, really bake that into your application because we are not involved in the evaluation. So we do have some quick resource links around the application, grant resources. We offer a Harvest of the Month program, both for educators. New this year, we will have the Harvest of the Month for educators at the preschool level or early education level, as well as we already have newsletters for elementary and secondary educators and our school nutrition programs. So if you're not yet familiar with that, we really encourage you to get involved in Harvest of the Month. There are different resources that are available to your programs, including posters and recipe ideas or lesson ideas, depending on your audience or who you are in the audience. And then we also offer an annual professional development calendar, and we will have tracks for different types of educators or school nutrition professionals. And with the professional development that we provide, it does come with continuing education credits. So you can receive your PDPs as a licensed educator or your CEUs for school nutrition. And we are also we're happy to host again the mini grant coaching session. So that's really 20 to 30 minutes of speaking with me or one of my other colleagues on the Mass Farm to School team about your particular Mass Fresh grant project. We have, certainly known all of the previous grantees and can talk about what's been successful or kind of help you pick through your idea or plan through your application to make it the most competitive that it can be. So you can sign up for one of those grant sessions using the QR code or clicking on the link that says mini grant coaching session if you are using this, if you're referencing the slide deck. And so again, if you have questions, get in touch with us. My email, both Maggie and my email are here, and we really hope you sign up for coaching sessions should you be curious to, flesh out your ideas. And the questions really need to be submitted to Maggie by that June 13th deadline, well in advance of the application deadline of the 27th. But thank you all so much for joining us on this information session today. We're really thrilled to have the Mass Fresh grant again be offered, and again it's pending appropriation. So we hope to have a robust cohort of new Mass Fresh grantees in the year ahead.
Thanks for applying.
Okay, I think I stopped.
It didn't say stop recording. Stop recording. Did it stop?
Pause.